Hi, this is Rick Roller, and this is another Google Meetup to help you get through the real estate exam the first time. The purpose of these Google Meetups is to tune you up so that you can get in there and pass your state's real estate exam the first time. I don't want you to flunk the exam. I want you to pass it the first time. I don't want you to give the exam companies any more money than you gave them one time around. I don't want you to suffer the embarrassment of having to go home and tell your family and friends you flunked the test, okay? So come to these Hangouts. I'll get you through the exam. I'm Rick Roller, and I'm the go-to guy to get you through the real estate exam. And why do I say that? Because I've helped thousands of students for years, since 1980, get through your state's real estate exam. Well, state real estate exams all over the country anyway. So I guess, I haven't done much with North Dakota. It's not. Anyway, but let's dig right in. Tonight's topic is appraisal. We're going to be talking about appraisal, and it's going to be fun. There's a lot of questions on the real estate exam about appraisal, and a lot of students have asked the question, well, why? Because I don't want to be an appraiser. I want to be a real estate salesperson. And, well, it's because they have such great terms. Devious exam writers can't leave it alone. Now, there is a legitimate reason that there's a lot of appraisal stuff on the exam, and that is that each state uses content experts that come together, and then they say, well, what is necessary for a beginning and advanced person to know in the real estate business? And then they outline that, and then they take their concepts for the exam from actual practical things. But by the time the devious exam writer get it, he likes to look at the terms, and you've got to learn all these different terms. So we're going to jump right in and do that. Now, we're going to do appraisal for a while, and then we've had some questions that have come in on the Google Plus side, or perhaps they were on the YouTube comments. I don't know, but I've got them written down, and we're going to look at some of those and answer, particularly for you that have been with us before. And we're going to talk a little bit about into question and answers. Some practical. I got a few practical questions here tonight, which are always kind of fun too. A little bit about math, and then we're going to end with a practical story about real estate, how to get going, and we're going to have some fun along the way. So if you'd like to submit a question, please do so. You can do it on the YouTube page, my YouTube channel comments, or you can actually send them in through Google Plus. There's a process there. You can do that. We've talked about putting up a Twitter account so we could do them during class, but none of us want to manage it. So anyway, this is a free thing. We're giving it to you. And oh, by the way, if you'd like to, you can also have the Rick Roller one-liner concept reviews. The one-liner concept reviews are another way to hone your skills to get through the test. And you can get those by going to www.rickroller.com/one-liners. And that's a free PDF you can download. Okay, there's about 47 of them there that'll help you get through the national portion of the test. So let's start off talking about value. Value has different definitions, and particularly on the real estate exam. The first concept about value I want you to understand is value in exchange. Well, if it's in exchange, it's like, look, I'll give you this if you give me that, okay? Value in exchange is objective. And what I mean by that is you can put a value on things by going out and looking at other things or doing some sort of analysis. And pretty much people are going to come up with the same figure. If you wanted to buy a gold bar, and it was like 10 troy ounces or something, and you wanted to buy that 10-ounce gold bar, you could look on the internet, or you could look at different exchanges that are publicize the current value of spot value of gold, and you can come up with the value. It's objective, and that's value in exchange. And it usually takes the point of view of the purchaser, because the purchaser will look at something and he'll say, well, it's worth about this much, and that's what I'll give it to. I'll give you that much for it. And if they won't take it, then you keep shopping. And that's value in exchange. It tends to be what? Objective. Value in exchange is objective. However, value in use tends to be subjective. it may be worth more to one person than it is to someone else. For example, we have a manufacturer, speaking of gold, we have one of the nation's largest manufacturers of class rings and other gold type trinkets that people buy when they graduate from high school and college and that sort of thing. Here in Salt Lake City, where I operate out of. And they started acquiring land in a certain area not too long ago, and they started buying up everything that was around them and tearing it down and making it beautiful and putting up nice things because they just like to do real nice things. They bought an old hotel that was next door, tore that down and made it into fountains and rose beds and gardens and a parking lot and some other buildings. I mean, they've done some phenomenal things for our community. But they are willing to pay more for the contiguous land next to them than someone else might pay for it. See, a buyer that really wasn't geographically locked into that area might say, well, I could buy this one, or I could buy the one down the street, or I could buy the one 2 blocks over. But for that company, they wanted the next piece that was contiguous to them, that was adjacent to their property. And so for them, they might pay more for that than somebody else. Value in use. They might be the only one in the community that would pay this higher price for that because for them, value in use, it was worth more money. If they needed to expand their parking lot, they couldn't go 3 blocks down, buy another piece of land, and then put in some sort of a trolley that would go back and forth, taking people from this further piece away back to their main operation or factory. They need something right next door that's contiguous. So to them, it might be worth more. Now that you can figure out. That they could sit down on a spreadsheet and say, well, it's a little bit over market value, but we could pay an extra 100 grand or 150 grand just because in the long run, it'd be worth it to us. Disneyland found themselves in that situation as they kept expanding their park, that the people that were right next door to it, made out real well because they needed it. They can't just build around it and have one house in the middle of Disneyland. You might get discounts to get in and out. I don't know, but it just wouldn't work. So value in use tends to be subjective. And that was very rational, and you can actually run a spreadsheet on it. But there's another type of value in use, and it's based on emotion. Sometimes people get emotionally involved with the property for one reason or another, and they will pay more for it just because it's what they wanted. And there's a lot of different examples of this, but I remember one in particular. Years ago, I sold one of the most expensive homes in a small community where I started in real estate. I say small, it was about 60,000 people at the time, but this gentleman had hoboed into the community many years ago. He came in on the back of a freight train, and through hard work, ingenuity, and smarts, native smarts, he had developed the knack of buying and selling real estate, and then developing real estate, and then building on real estate, and he became a multimillionaire. Well, on his way up this trek to become a multimillionaire, there was this guy in town that did him wrong. And, he never forgot it. Well, as luck would have it, that guy that had done my buyer wrong, unfortunately, was going through a divorce and some other financial failures. He was on his way down. And there's only one house in town that my buyer wanted. And it was that guy's house because that guy had done him wrong. And he actually paid, I thought, about $25,000, $30,000 more than what I thought that house was worth. But to my buyer, it was worth it. Because he'd get up in the morning and he'd put on his silk bathrobe, he'd walk around his beautiful home and he'd say, I bought his house and it's mine now. Yeah, well, to him, it was worth it. And of course, he had the money to fulfill whatever wishes. But sometimes people get too emotionally involved in the property and they pay more than they need to. But that's another type of value and use. It has nothing to do with the spreadsheet. It can be emotional, and it's subjective. It's in the eye of the beholder. So 2 concepts: value and exchange, objective; value and use, subjective. And then we have another concept that's always tested, and it's called fair market value. Fair market value can be defined. It is that price that a willing buyer and a willing seller will agree on, who both are knowledgeable, with no undue influence in a reasonable amount of time. And that is fair market value. Sometimes people buy below fair market value. They get a deal. Maybe they're buying a bank repo, or they're getting a short sale, or maybe they found a real motivated seller, just needed to get out of town in a hurry. And so they're willing to take less for a cash sale or for whatever reason. But sometimes people pay more than fair market value as well. So values kind of float around. There's different dimensions and aspects to it. You have to know value in exchange, what? It's what? Objective. That's right. Value in use, subjective. And you have to have a handle on what is fair market value. Because in real estate, you and I are mostly dealing with fair market value. Sometimes a little over, sometimes a little under. But fair market value is a concept you've got to really look at. Then there's another concept called cost and price. Well, cost is what is historic. It's what you paid for something. And you know, I could have paid more or less for a property. If I paid more and the fair market value is lower now, I'm going to lose some money. But if I paid less, it cost me this much, and I put a price on it now that is higher, then I'm going to make some money. You know, so cost versus price. Price is what I'm asking. Hopefully it's near fair market value enough to entice a buyer to buy it, below or above. And regardless of what the price is now, if I paid less for it, you know, historically, I'm going to make some money. So cost is what you paid, historic. Price is what you're asking. Could be fair market value, could not be fair market value. It really kind of depends. And then let's talk now a little bit about a definition of value. And most real estate texts, all real estate schools have mnemonic devices which help you remember different definitions. And for value, it's DUST, D-U-S-T. DUST, D-U-S-T, DUST. DUST are, each one of those letters is one of the dimensions or element of fair market, or of, excuse me, value, okay? So the first one is D, is demand. In order for something to have a value, it has to have a demand for it. You know, you can drive through some of our Western communities, and, you know, they're not like back east where you have everything all developed. You know, you can go into some towns and you can see huge tracts of ground and with big signs on them saying commercial land, but there's no commercial activity. So there's plenty of land, but there's no demand for it. So you're not going to have much value. But demand has another element to it. It must be effective demand. People not only have to want it, they have to have the ability to buy it. You can go out and look at the new Tesla, you know, the S model. My goodness, beautiful car, $80-some thousand, a little bit more sometimes, depending on the options you want to get. And it's a wonderful car. I mean, wow. I mean, it's one of the safest cars out there. You know, you never have to buy gas again. Cool. You know, and it's just a cool car, a lot of great technology in it. But if you don't have the $85,000 to buy a Tesla, you personally are not going to affect the value of that car. And the same thing in real estate. Lots of people could look, but if they don't have the ability to buy and their demand is effective demand, it's not going to influence value. The U in DUST stands for utility. Property has to have a usefulness. And a lot of things might enter into that. You know, it could be that you have a beautiful piece of ground, but you can't get any utilities to it. There's no gas, there's no electric, you know, there's no sewer available, there's no water out there. Not going to have a lot of value unless it has usefulness. And part of having usefulness is having the amenities that people want in order to do something with that ground. So utility, it must have a usefulness in order to have value. And then S stands for scarcity. Scarcity. Scarcity is an interesting concept because, you know, Will Rogers used to say, buy land, they're not making any more. Catchy, but not exactly true, because we are making more land. I mean, over in Dubai, they actually did some filling in order to make more islands. But we're making more ground in a lot of different ways, and one of them is to actually build up. So we have a 1-story, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10-story property. Didn't you make more usable ground from that same footprint by going up or going down? The same thing. So scarcity does have a physical element to it, but it also has a political or economic element to it as well, because sometimes scarcity is influenced by communities. Because the communities do master planning, whether it's the city or the county, and what they do is they go in and they say, well, we're not going to allow any more, retail mall development because we already have enough ground in our master plan zone for that, or we're not going to allow any more high-rise office lots because we already have enough that's not developed, that's already zoned for that. And you say, yeah, but it's not my 40 acres. I want my 40-acre zone for the mall, or I want my 40-acre zone for that high-rise building. They say, well, tough noogies, it's not in our master plan. So through the use of political influences or zoning, police power, municipalities can actually create scarcity as well. And then the last one is transferability, the T. Transferability means you have the ability to transfer it to someone else. I mean, if people want to buy your property, but it's locked up in some sort of litigation or lawsuit that's ongoing and has been ongoing for like 3 or 4 years and probably won't settle out for another 3 or 4 years, for the next 3 or 4 years, the value of that property is going to be diminished because you cannot transfer it. Other things can affect transferability, like CC&Rs, covenants and restrictions, or perhaps deed restrictions, or perhaps you have given away some of the rights to your property. For example, you entered into a 99-year land lease. If you've entered into a 99-year land lease, and all of a sudden all the contiguous properties around you, or maybe on the main boulevard, start multiplying in value rapidly, it's irrelevant. Because what your property is worth is, the 15 years left on the lease or the 50 years left on the lease. It's worth the income stream, and we can figure that out on a spreadsheet. That's what it's worth, not what other lands in the area that are not encumbered because they didn't give away their possession on a long-term lease. You affected the transferability, and you affected the value of your property. So demand, utility, scarcity, transferability. I've seen a lot of questions on the exam where they'll say, which one of the following is not an essential element of value? And then they have demand, utility, transferability, and they substitute out the S for something else. And the favorite word is situs, because situs is an appraisal word. Situs means location preference, but it's not an essential element of value. The essential element is scarcity, not situs. So if you see that one, go for situs because it's not one of the 4 essential elements. But that's an example sometimes of how devious exam writers take, like, these are the 4 concepts, these are the 5 pieces, these are the 6 essential elements, and then they'll take a word that's similar that still spells dust, 2 S's, and they'll throw it in there. And so you really need to know your stuff, guys. So, a little bit about that there. Now let's talk about appraisal and the process. Appraisal has an organized process to it, and a lot of times when you're talking about appraisal, you'll hear the word USPAP. USPAP is the Uniform Standards of the Appraisal Practice, and what it is federal legislation that came out with rules for appraisers. And so the appraisal process is really regimented. They have steps they have to follow and standards they have to apply and use, and they can be looked at and reviewed by other appraisers who will say, no, you went off course here. Now that sounds a lot like science, because that's what it does. You have the scientific method, and others could peer review your particular study and say if it was any good or not. Similar to appraisals, although appraisals do have a process and it is organized, but appraisals, my friends, are not scientific. You'll find out once you get into business that appraisals are not scientific. They're artwork. They're artistic. And sometimes the appraiser paints with watercolors, and sometimes he paints with acrylics, and sometimes he's so far off the mark that you wondered if he used chalks or something. I don't know. And in those cases, you might even be, tempted to call it not even artistic, maybe autistic, because it has no basis in reality. But that's not fair. It's a tough job being an appraiser, and it's tough finding and analyzing and making it all work. And it's a lot of work, and it's a fascinating field. I used to do a lot of appraisals before they actually had licensing, but I didn't want to get licensed, so I quit doing them. I used to have one credit union in particular I worked for. But now, of course, as brokers and agents working through your broker, you can actually do broker price opinions, which virtually all states have an exclusion in the licensing law for appraisers that says that if you're a realtor, if you're a real estate salesperson and a license, and you're out doing in your normal course of business evaluations of property, then you don't need an appraiser license. Okay, so there's a lot of steps in the process. I'm not going to get into them that deep, but I want you to understand the first step, because that's when it gets tested on a lot. The first step in the appraisal process is to define the problem. And you might say, well, what's the problem? He's got to come up with fair market value. Not necessarily. An appraiser might be tasked at finding a quick sale price. If it's a bank REO and they want a fair market value, but they want a quick sale price. Or he might be, or she might be tasked with finding out the value of a lease within a property. Or they might be tasked with finding out, they might be working for an estate. And so they have to define what the problem is. What am I trying to come up with? They may have a piece of dirt that's just zoned agricultural. And the owners say, well, is there something more we can do other than farm on this? I mean, does it have to be agricultural? What is the highest and best use of this property? And so the appraiser might be tasked to go out and find out what that is too. So defining a problem is actually really important. And they go about gathering this information and putting it all together. And then they actually look at a number of principles that are there that kind of undermine or give substance and a foundation to the appraisal process. And so I mentioned one a minute ago, was highest and best use. So let's talk about these different concepts, because those are great wake-up items for the exam. So wake up for this part, folks, because they're very important. And that's all we're doing here, is talking about how to get through the exam. Highest and best use is that use which would give the property the greatest amount of cash flow. It's all about the money. If someone might say, well, I've lived here all my life and I like having this house, even though all these big high rises have built up around me, and I'm just going to finish out here. I'm not going to sell my property. I'm 70 some years old. I figure I got another 20 years to live, and I'm going to live it right here. I'm not selling. Is that the highest and best use of that property? Single family residence? Probably not. The highest and best use would be for him to sell it, get out of Dodge, go somewhere where there's more sun and there's a beach, and have someone build another high rise there, tear his house down. But, when an appraiser is looking at highest and best use, first thing I want to look at, is it legal, and will the zoning allow it? And then they have to also look at it, is it probable? Can we actually do that? You might say the highest and best use of this property would be for another shopping mall. But when you look at it, the dynamics in the community, there's already 2 or 3 big malls. There's just not a room. There's not enough retail sales that would support a 4th mall. So it's not probable. So even though that would get you the most money for the property, it's really not something that the property could be used for right then. So that would be highest and best use. Substitution. Now, substitution is the foundation of one of the 3 approaches to value. So it's the foundation of the market data approach, which we'll talk about in a minute. So odds are, when I've been taking the test all over the country from various providers, I've always seen the principle of substitution on the exam. Substitution means you can kind of figure out what this is worth by looking at comparable properties out there and then trying to make them all look similar on paper. And so I know this house like this is worth about $300,000 because I can buy a house like that all over town for $300,000. That's the principle of substitution. It's comparison shopping. It's probably one of the easiest concepts to understand, ladies, because if you're out looking for that pair of boots you want, if you check various stores, you're going to find the quality and you're going to find the price you want at one of those stores. You're probably going to principle of substitution says that you won't pay any more than you have to get the utility you need. And that's the principle of substitution. Very, very important. Conformity is a good term to know. And what you're talking about here is that properties in planned communities tend to retain their value better because it's not a hodgepodge. I love where I live and it's great here, and I love the mountains and recreational opportunities, and it's just fantastic. But there's a lot of elements in our community where you'll be in a neighborhood of $600,000-$700,000 homes, and you'll go 2 blocks and there's a trailer court. I mean, that's not very good land planning, and that's not good conformity. contrast that to the Irvine community, which was totally master planned. I mean, and you kind of know in California, and you kind of know what I'm talking about. But conformity says you have the best situation going for you for a long-term increase in sustaining a value if all the properties are similar, in size and whatnot. We see it violated a lot. We see a builder come in perhaps and he buys 2 lots in a subdivision and builds this huge mansion, and all the comparable homes are 275 and his would probably be worth 800 anywhere else, but because all these little homes are around it, it's going to pull that value down. And the same thing, that would be regression, and the same thing could work in the opposite direction. If you buy the teeniest, smallest piece of junk in the swanky area. So all these $100 million or hundreds of $1 million homes all around you, and you're in this one little cracker box, and you can pretty much do whatever you want with that property, get your money back. And that's the principle of progression. So you're pulled up. As the tides rise, it pulls up all ships, including yours. Okay. Principle of contribution is often violated. And you'll see this a lot when you get into business and you'll go look at homes, and people remodel or decorate or improve homes for their own taste, and if they wanted a steam shower and they wanted a tub and a shower and nobody else has anything like that in the neighborhood, the 10 or 15 grand they put into that bathroom, or 30, they may not get back out, because the principle of contribution says that you're not violating it as long as the money you put in the house, you can get it back plus a little bit more, make a profit, right? So if you put in that 30 grand in a kitchen remodel and all of a sudden your home's worth 50 grand more, hey, that was a good move. You didn't violate the principle of contribution. But when you go out there, you'll find, people that do all sorts of incredible things. They have a basement, it's only 7.5 feet tall. So you got to, if you're a tall guy, you got to hunch over when you're down there. But, they totally remodel it. It's just fabulous, just like upstairs. And they've got crown molding, and they got, a lot of high-end stuff down there. They're not going to get their money back out of that house. I mean, that basement remodel. It's just not going to happen. Not unless they had free labor and, just bought everybody off with, a couple of cases of beer or something that did all the work. It's not going to happen. Okay, those are important to know, and there's a few others, but I think you get the idea. You got to work on those, guys, and you got to understand what each one of those concepts are. There's others like the cycle of change, that neighborhoods kind of go through a pattern where, they go through an integration stage where the homes are new and they're built, and then they hit an equilibrium where they don't really go up, but they don't really go down. And this could happen over 60 years. And then they hit a disintegration stage, and then hit equilibrium. And, so it goes through these different cycles. And you can make money on any of those, depending on what you pay and how you buy. And of course, as a real estate agent, you always make a commission, right? At least that's our plan. And so we go out and we sell all kinds of homes and properties and make money there. Okay, let's now get into what I think I'm going to spend the majority of my time on, or at least this is something you really got to get. And that's the 3 approaches to value. Okay. Now, when we're talking about 3 approaches to value, an appraiser has to look at each one of these. Now, his actual report that he issues in the real world may not have the income approach for single-family residence. He may make a comment like the income approach really wasn't germane, or it didn't really influence the value of my analysis. But at least he considered it. So all appraisers use the 3 approaches to value in every appraisal, but they don't necessarily lend any credence or weight to it if it's not applicable, but they considered it. Okay, so on the test, every appraisal must have all 3 approaches to value. Okay, and so they are the market data approach, or sometimes called comparison, cost approach, and the income approach. Market data, cost, and income. And we're going to look at each one of these a little bit more in depth. But first, I want to back up a little bit and say that there's certain kinds of properties that these 3 approaches to value lend themselves to, one stronger than another. The market data approach lends itself best to residential properties. Well, that's simple. There's so many comparables out there. The market data approach, if you were applying that to a single family residence, you can probably find a lot of sales of similar residences. And so market data approach lends itself best to single family residence. Now, is it used in income property? Oh, absolutely. Is it used in vacant land? Sure, if you can find the comps, okay? But there's lots of easy and readily available comps, usually for residential. And so the market data lends itself to that. I mean, if I was evaluating the 3 approaches and I'm an appraiser and I came up with 3 different indications of value and it was a single family residence, I would lean on the market data most heavily. Now, the cost approach lends itself best to unusual properties or service properties, like a school. How many schools do you think you can find that have actually sold? You go out there, hey, have any school buildings sold in the neighboring communities around here in the last few years? You know, probably not. What about churches? You know, churches don't turn over rapidly either. And so service properties are built for a specific purpose and service. The cost approach lends itself best to those, because what is a school worth? Well, let's figure out what it would cost to replace that, you know, minus a few things, and then all of a sudden, well, coming up with a value. So can't really rely on the market data when you can't find any comparable sales. So cost approach works well there. And then the income approach, of course, lends itself best to income producing properties. The more those properties produce an income, the greater the worth they have. And it doesn't really matter what they're made out of. Years ago, I had a syndicator investor I did a lot of work for. And he told me about a deal he did on the beach in California. And what he found was the last little piece of beach property, beachfront property, that actually had a liquor license to it. And maybe the liquor license was worth more than the property, because this was kind of a rundown ramshack kind of a place. But it was on a popular beach, and he bought it and made buku bucks out of that thing. He told me that on weekends he had to sneak in a kind of a tanker truck, and they had a little kind of the palm fronds that they would put around the truck, so that you wouldn't really notice it that much. But he had to pump the sewer from the property into the tanker truck. And if you'd been, the Coastal Commission and found out about that, they probably would have closed him down. But man, he made good money. And finally, he sold that. And the interesting thing on that was that you couldn't get a building permit to build anything like that or anything new, but you could remodel. So they tore it all down except for a little tiny piece of it, and then just kind of built around it. And it was a remodel, not a tear down and rebuild. Okay, but he made good money on that one, probably because of the location. But why was the value so prominent on that? It's because of all the money it produced. I mean, people on the beach want to drink, and they want something to eat, and there weren't a lot of places to go to. And so it was the income that property could produce and the amount of rent that the innkeeper could pay in order to be there and still make a profit that really made that valuable. So it really didn't matter if it's made out of stone or brick or palm fronds. As long as the money was coming in, that's what we look at when we're looking at the income approach. Okay, now all of these approaches have a formula. Let's go to the board and I'll kind of write them down for you. Okay. First of all, if you're going to do the market data approach, we have to find market data. Oh, wait a second. Market data. Okay. Brain cramp. Okay, thankfully that never happens to me when I'm taking the test. Okay, market data. Market data approach has a formula. And the formula is comps, or find comparables, okay, plus or minus adjustments equals value. Okay. Once again, this lends itself to what kind of properties? That's right. Market data lends itself to residential properties. Okay, now we go out and we find houses that are similar to our subject property. And the closer they are to it, great. The more like it, great, in all aspects, as far as age, size, maybe they were even built by the same builder, better yet. But on all of these, some of them are going to have adjustments made. So we take the comps and what that value was. Now, please understand that a comp is a recent sale, and for appraisals they go back like 6 months, and if it's older than that, it doesn't have as much credence because the market can go up or down. So if it's 6 months new, they take that value and they add or subtract to it. They make adjustments to it to make the comps look more like the subject. Now herein is a huge wake-up item. You always adjust the comps. You never adjust the subject property. You always adjust. We don't know what the subject's worth. How can we adjust it? We're adjusting the comps because this is a historic fact. This one sold 2 months ago, or this one sold 2 weeks ago, and it sold for this much money. However, this comp we're looking at is not exactly like our subject. This comp we're looking at is better than our subject. It is better in the fact that it has 2 fireplaces and our subject only has 1 fireplace. So a reasonable appraiser or person would say, if this comp is better than my subject property, I'm going to have to make a negative adjustment. In other words, on paper, I got to take away one of those fireplaces in order to make it look more like my subject property. So if the comparable is superior to the subject, we got to take some of the money away, because a ready, willing, and able buyer who is knowledgeable and not under duress in a reasonable period of time paid this much money for it, and he probably paid a little bit more because it had an additional fireplace. So the appraiser then would say, well, I got to take off a fireplace, money-wise. Or maybe there's a difference in garages. Our subject property has a 3-car garage, and this comp we're looking at only has a 2-car garage. Well, that makes the comparable inferior to our subject. So we're going to have to add some value to what this comp sold for to make it look more like our subject property. So we got to add the value of that 3rd-car garage. So we take the comps, we add if the comp is inferior, or we take away if the comp is superior, an adjustment, and that gives us the value. Real simple, okay? That's the market data approach. The next approach is the cost approach, and it has a formula as well. It is land plus, this is a plus, improvements minus depreciation equals value. Okay, now, on the cost approach, this lends itself best to like service properties. Now understand, we're going to do a cost approach on the house as well. But if there was a big difference here, we're probably going to go on this one more than this one. Okay, but a lot of times in a hot market where properties are scarce and it's hard to find things and builders are doing really well, the cost approach can come in a little higher than the comps sometimes because builders are pushing their profits up and they're still getting it. And but in a slower market where there's tons of things for sale, sometimes people can get a better shake on this, maybe a used home than they can on a brand new one, and so that might pull it down a little bit. But on the test, this is a huge wake-up item right here, this word land. Because this is the only formula of the 3 we're going to look at, market data, cost, and we're going to look at income in a moment, that actually has land pulled out as a separate component. You see, you could take the exact same house, same floor plan, same materials, same quality of finish, and put them on different pieces of land. Going back to California, for instance, put one on a beach front, and it's going to be worth millions of dollars more than the one way, way, way back in the Inland Empire. Well, why? Well, it's simple, because the land is worth a lot more, not the actual cost of the property. So this is the only approach to value, cost approach, that has land pulled out as a separate element. When we're looking at the market data and you're finding comps, it already includes the land in the deal. But here, it's pulled out as a separate value. So land plus the improvements minus depreciation equals value. Let's talk about improvements. How are we going to do that? Well, there's different ways that we can come up with the improvements. There's cost estimating services guides that they can use. They can actually do a quantity survey where they go in and do a kind of like a builder's takeoff, where they figure out how many 2x4s and how much wiring and how much carpet and how much flooring and how many sheets of sheetrock and how many sheets of plywood do we have to do to put this house together. And sometimes they do a little less involved than quantity survey, and this is one they do most, and that is they just do a unit in place analysis where, well, a typical house of this size, the electrician would charge this, a plumber would charge this, and that would include all the fixtures and labors to put it in there. And so they do a unit in place. So you could do quantity survey, you could do unit in place, okay? You could do square footage. Square footage says, well, it's about this much, this quality would be about this square footage. But you're going to figure out what the improvements are worth, Okay. Once you have this figure and what the improvements are worth, you have to depreciate it. Now, depreciation, when it's used in a real estate exam, has one meaning if you're talking taxes. And if you're talking taxes, it's some fuzzy thinking tax loophole concept that has no basis in reality. It just says, the government says it'll fall down in 25 or 28 years. So you can take 25 or 28 or 32, whatever lifespan they decide, and divide that into the improvements, and you can write that off in your taxes every year if it's an income producing type property. What happens in 15, 20 years, 25 years from now? The property's worth 10 or 15 times more than it was 25 years ago, maybe more. So it hasn't fallen down. So where was the reality there? There was no reality. Depreciation, when used for income tax purposes, my friends, is nothing more than a tax loophole concept. There's no basis in reality. Now, appraisers, they're dealing in the real world. They're out there dealing with real sticks and bricks and things, and they're founded on the solid ground, okay? And so when we're talking about an appraiser, he's talking about several different things that could actually depreciate the cost new, okay? And one of them might be a physical wear and tear. If you walk in a house and the carpet's stained and has holes in it, and there's holes punched in the drywall, we call it a foreclosure, and some of the stuff's missing out of the house, that's not as good as one that's pristine. If you walk in one that's pristine, it would have less depreciation. So getting kind of artsy here, the appraiser's got to go in and say, all right, for one in this shape, I'm going to have to hit it about $25,000 or $250,000. They have to come up with a figure to take off the cost new of the improvements. And so that gets kind of artsy. But it could be other things too. It could be functional obsolescence. Now, functional obsolescence is poor floor plan. I mean, we've all been in homes that have really stupid floor plans, And I sold a home once, and took a while, and it sold for like $20,000 less than other comparable homes in the neighborhood. But it sold for less because you go in the kitchen, this kitchen was beautiful, it's great, it's a newer home. But there was this nice 6-panel door right here on the edge of the kitchen, and he said, it must be a pantry or something. You opened up, and it was a master bedroom. Now, the master bedroom entrance was right off the kitchen. Kind of a silly floor plan, Now some people look at that and say, whoa, that's an amenity. I love that. I'm close to the fridge. Most buyers look at that and say, oh my goodness, kids on Saturday morning coming in and getting cereal, making noise. I don't want to, no way, okay? And it hurt it, about $20,000. So we might say that property sold for $20,000 less because of $20,000 worth of functional obsolescence, poor floor plan. Now, it could be other things. It could have all two-prong plugs everywhere because it has old wiring, or it's just something that's kind of it's just not up to standard. And so that, but poor floor plan is the main one. Okay, and then there's something called economic obsolescence. Everything's pristine about the house. It's great. It's got a great floor plan. Everyone loves it, but there are no jobs in this community anymore. I mean, the big factory shut down, and everyone moved out. So there's like 130 of them just like this for sale, and what hurt the value of that property is not anything else other than the fact it's suffering from economic obsolescence. If interest rates are sky high and people can't afford homes, it will affect the value as well. Particularly high-end stuff, because no one can afford that. And so economic obsolescence, functional obsolescence, and actually physical wear and tear, physical deterioration, are the three types of depreciation that our appraiser has to look at, because this improvement is replacement cost new that they came up with one of those various methods minus this depreciation, and that gives us our value. And that's cost approach. Now, the last one, really, the income approach, deserves its own page. So we're going to get it its own page. All right. So the income approach has a formula, and it's called IRV, I-R-V. Income equals rate times value. And this is the formula we use for the income approach. Now, the major trick on this one that they're going to try to play on you is term. You got to be very careful on how the money's coming in, okay? Because the income approach is always annual, 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 annual. That's a hypnotic technique. Try that at home. Go like this. You'll say annual, annual. In fact, if a lot of people are watching my videos, which would be great, you can just go to the test center and you forget, you just click, someone across the room will say annual. It kind of helps you out. That was a joke. Don't do that. But the income is always what? Annual. It's always what? Annual. All right. So what's a DV's exam writer going to do? They're going to give you monthly income. They're going to give you quarterly income. Okay. And you've got to make it what? Annual. Simple. 12 times or, quarterly times, 4 times. I mean, guys, most math problems you're going to see out there, most of them, you have to manipulate the numbers they gave you in order to get the real numbers you need to do the problem. And this is one of the main ones they do on the income approach, is they give you a monthly or quarterly or semi-annual income. You got to make it what? Annual. Annual. Okay. So we have an annual income. That's only the first step. The second step is the income is always net operating income. NOI, net operating income. Now, what I mean by that is it is net of expenses. Most of the time, they give you the expenses as a percentage. A property has $12,000 in annual income. It's a little cheapy, okay? But it has $2,000 a year in expenses. So what is the NOI? Do we use $12,000 and plug that into our formula? Or do we put $10,000 in the formula? Yeah. It has to be annual, and it has to be NOI, net operating income. If you've got those two things seared in your brain, annual, 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 and NOI, net of expenses, then you can work the formula, and it's not that tough. Because there's variations of the formula, of course. If you're looking for the value, and we just move that on this side of the equation here, then it's value equals income divided by, because we moved it, so you take this out, divided by the what? Rate. Well, let's do a couple of these. Let's say the income of a property is what we're solving for. Let's say the rate, our cap rate, this is the rate we use, cap rate, also called capitalization rate, also called capitalizing an income, but cap rate is 10%. Now, if it's 10%, guys, we have to convert this to a decimal equivalent because most of you don't know how to use the percentage key in your calculator. So just change this to a decimal equivalent. See, there's 2 circles here. Go 1, 2, 0.10, 10% is 10%, okay? So the rate is 10%, or cap rate's 10, and it's a percentage, 0.10, times the value. Let's say the value is $100,000, okay? 10% of $100,000 means our income would be $10,000, okay? Simple. But wait a minute. We're solving for value now. We know the income is $10,000, and the rate they give us is 10%. Now, they may give you the rate in a gross income. You have to make it into NOI. They may give you the rate as a monthly income. You have to make it into annual and NOI, okay? But once you've got this number to do the problem, since we move that over here, value over here, this is a division now. So we take our income divided by the rate. If the income was $10,000 divided by 0.10, this divided into that is $100,000. Simple, okay? And then one more variation would be if we're solving for the rate, same thing, equals income divided by value. Value. Okay, so the income is $10,000 again, but the value is $100,000. Take 10 divided by 100, and you come up with a rate of 0.1 on your calculator or 0.10. Brokers, when you're taking your exam, I want you to push your decimal point out 4 places if you can, and learn how to do that. If you're using one of the HP products, it's very simple. But push that out to 4 places, particularly when you're doing your settlement sheets. I want 4 places on that. Okay. So this is the income approach. Lends itself best to income type properties. Make sense? Sure does. Okay. And the formula. So the 3 formulas, moving back to the chair, that we use are right there for you to use. Okay. Okay. A few more things, and then let's get into some questions. Okay. Well, a couple more terms. Let's talk about the term amenity. Amenities are things that people like. It could be a view. And this house sells for, $100,000 more because of the view, a view of the ocean, view of the mountains, view of whatever is pretty around there. And how do you put a value on that? Well, appraisers once again go to the marketplace and they find homes that also had comparable views, see what they sold for, find homes without the view, see what they sold for, and the difference is what people are willing to pay for the view. That's called a match pair analysis. And they do that all the time. Or they just talk to each other and say, hey, what are you paying for a view these days? When they go to lunch at Arby's, and they find out, they talk amongst themselves, and they figure that, hey, I just did a big analysis on that. I analyzed 45 properties, and it's about this much. Oh, okay, I'll use that too. But it's amenity. It's things that people like. And you can make really good money in real estate if you're a remodeler and you know what's hot and what's not, what's hot in colors, what's hot in amenities, whether it's really fancy showers in the master bedroom, or fabulous kitchens with 2 sinks, or is granite in, is granite out. If you know what people are looking for, and you'll know because you're out with them every day. You're out with buyers every day. Oh, hopefully you're out with buyers every day, and so you'll find out what people want, and there's some real opportunity there for you. Okay, another concept in appraisal is age, and age is important because properties have a physical life. They weren't there, then they were built, and they're there. Then you can go and you can look in the county records, and you can find out that property is built in 1980 or 1990 or 2000. And it's 2015 now. It's 15 years old. So that's the physical life of that property. It's 15 years old. Okay, if it's built in 2000. But then there's another term called the effective age. And that property's been there for 15 years. It has been really taken care of. If there was a mar on the wall, it got fixed and painted. You walk in there and it's like a model home. It's like better than new. It's fantastic. Well, then the physical life is 15 years, but wait a minute, the effective age might be 0. Or the effective age might be built in 2015, even though it was really built about 15 years ago. Contrast that with a property that's been torn up and has not been taken care of. It could be 6 months old. It could be 2 years old. In this last little shebang we had in real estate, you could find properties that were built 2 years ago that have been trashed. And so you walk in, and there's holes in the walls and things torn out, and half the appliances are gone, and someone pulled all the copper out of the house, and you're looking at it and say, oh my goodness. This house is only 2 years old physical age, but its effective age is like, 85 years old. So one of the things an appraiser has to do is to come in and look at what is the effective age. Because appraisers want to know. Appraisers want to know because their clients, the banks, want to know. And the banks don't want to do a 30-year loan on a property that has a very short remaining life. Well, how do they know what the short remaining life is? Because they have estimates. And what they have is something called the economic life that they go by. And the economic life of a brick home might be, 48 years or 50 years, okay? And through the cost estimating guides, they come up with these estimates. If the economic life is 50 years, but the effective age is 49 years, it's got 1 year left before you're going to tear it down. You think a bank's going to make a 30-year loan on that property? Probably not. Probably going to have to get a hard money lender to lend you some money, fix it all up really cool and neat, and then have the effective age come way down. Okay, and then the bank, oh, well, gee, it's like new, it's great. So it's got to have like maybe a 50-year life. We'll do a 30-year loan in a heartbeat. So those can become really important too, okay? Okay, now, a lot of people have, well, some people here, I got a whole stack of them. have sent in some questions. So let's kind of go through those and let's talk about those. Oh, here's one. This is from Jenny. And she said, could you explain the division of sections? You did appraisal last week. I watched, I enjoyed the program, but you didn't talk about this quarter of a quarter or half of a half of a half stuff. You know, Jenny, I apologize for that. You're right. So let me go back to the screen here again, and let me give you a quick little rundown on that. What is confusing for a lot of students is the division of a section. Now, a section, if you remember, would be 5,280 feet this way, 5,280 feet this way, is 640 acres. So it's really, you know, a big piece of land. But a lot of times you'll see something that says, okay, it's the southeast quarter of the north half of the north half. Okay, so this is the division of this section. It's a quarter of a half of a half. And they'll say it's a southeast quarter of the north half of the north half. Now, the key to using these, guys, is you've got to go backwards. You got to read it backwards, like Arabic. You got to read it backwards, okay? So what happens is we start here, not here, because this is the smallest piece you ended up with, and this is bigger, and this is bigger than that. So that's why you go backwards. So the north half, we divide in half. This is the north half. This is the south half. This is the north half. But it didn't say south half. It said north half. So this is the north half. And then the north half of the north half. Okay, so this is the north half of the north half. And then it says the southeast quarter. So divide that in quarters. So this would be the southeast quarter right here of the north half of the north half of a particular section. Section 16, you know, township range 1. And, you know, you know, so it, you know, tier 3 south of a certain baseline and principal meridian. So that's how that works. Okay. Now, most of the exams you're going to be taking do not have graphics capabilities. A lot of them are on computers today. They just haven't invested the money to make them graphic. So you're not going to see an exam question that says, what is this? You know? Now, if you did see an exam session, the question says, what is that? How would you figure that out? Well, you know, it might be more like this, where it would be like this. Describe that for us, okay? So it kind of looks like that. But, well, let me see. Let me see. It says, first of all, this is the whole thing, and this would be in the north half. So you start backwards, north half. Okay. Now you could say this was the east half of the north half, or you could say it would. You could go straight to it and say it was the southeast quarter of the north half of the north half. So you could just kind of work it backwards. But I don't really care about describing it. What I care about is getting back to the 640 acres, because most tests don't have the graphics, but you do have to know it's 640 acres. So if you knew it was the southeast quarter of the north half of the north half, the question is going to be, how big is it? That's the question. Okay, cool and easy, because math works both ways. You can work it backwards, like if you're trying to locate it. Well, what's half of this? Well, half of that would be 320. Okay. And what's half of that? Well, half of that would be what, guys? Like 160, right? And then what's a quarter of that? It'd be 40. So the question is answered with 40 acres. Now let's go the other way. Okay. Let's say the quarter of this. Quarter of this would be 160, right? And half of that would be 80, and half of that would be 40. So see, the math works either way. So, Jenny, sorry that I didn't get into that last time. Probability of seeing it's pretty good, you know. But just remember, math works either way. But remember the 640, and that'll help you. Okay, here's a question of Paul. Paul says, does an easement have priority over a loan that has been recorded on a property? Okay, well, does an easement have priority over a loan that has been recorded on a property? Well, it depends on which one Paul was recorded first. Usually, first to record is first in right. Most easements were put into place when this larger tract was made into a subdivision. And so they put in easements for roads and utilities, you know, like for the cable TV and the water and the sewer and whatnot. And they usually run along the sides of the property. Sometimes a sewer line or water line have to cross in a different area, but the loan in that case would be behind the easements. In other words, the easements would have rights first and the loan have rights later. Now, these are two types of encumbrances. A loan is a lien on a property, and an easement is a non-financial encumbrance. You know, that affects the use thereof. But sometimes if you're dealing with larger tracts, you're getting into commercial or land sales, you know, there could be utilities running right down through the middle of it. And one of the problems with that is that unless you can relocate that out to the sides, you can't build on top of that utility line. You can't build on top of that easement, even if it's not there yet. So obviously, if it's been recorded on the property prior to the loan, it would have priority. And it's something you have to look at. Now, this first record first and right is an important concept. And, you know, I know a lot of this stuff sounds a little dry to you, but I'm telling you, learn as much as you can when you're putting all this stuff in your head, because when you get out there in the real world, some of these things can actually make you some money. Let me give you a little example of that. Back on the board here. Let's talk about a deal I did a long time ago. So I'm going to keep the math really simple, but I want you to understand first to record is first and right. Okay. Now, many years ago, I'll keep the math really simple. I sold this little property for $40,000. Okay. It's a nice little house in a marginal area in our city. The guy got a hold, well, I actually picked him up through an expired listing. And I put it up for sale. And the cool thing about this house was it had a really small $28,000 FHA assumable mortgage on it. Now, back in the day, we had FHA loans that could be assumed by anyone on what's called a simple assumption. You didn't have to credit qualify, you just sent in your name and address and they gave you the loan. So along comes this buyer, and the buyer wants to buy the property. Seller wants to sell really bad, and the buyer wants to buy really bad. The buyer had $7,000 in cash that he'd squirreled away in a coffee can that he wanted to buy this property as the down payment. The seller was willing to let the buyer come in and assume his FHA mortgage, take the 7 away from the 40, and that would leave 33,000, take the 28 from that, and the seller would carry that difference as a second mortgage. Okay, so 28 from 33 was about $5,000, right? Okay, so this would be a second mortgage. So we get ready to do this deal. Title company does an investigation, and lo and behold, our buyer was a real flake. I wasn't representing the buyer, I was representing the seller, but there were no other realtors in this deal. I wrote the deal up for the buyer, not representing him. And that, you know, when we get into agency class, we'll talk about that. I didn't really like the buyer that much. There's something about him that was off, but the seller really wanted to sell bad. And the $70,000 or $7,000 a pretty dang good down payment on a $40,000 house. It's dang near 20%. I mean, that's a great down payment on a house. But the problem was the buyer had a judgment against him. Now, this judgment was for recovery services. It turns out that this buyer was a deadbeat dad and had not been paying his child support obligations, which is probably why the $7,000 was in a can, because he was hiding from his obligations. And recovery services in our state were casting about looking for any asset they could snag in order to get this guy to own up to his responsibilities, but they weren't having any luck. But he, for whatever reason, he wanted to come out from behind his facade and come out from behind his bush he had been hiding and become a real citizen and buy a house. This is a good thing, especially since my seller wanted to sell it. But the problem was If we close this house, there would be a deed that would be transferred from my seller to the buyer, okay? And the second that deed went into the record, the second it was recorded, the judgment would come in and lapse in, snap on right then to the buyer's house. And then my seller's $5,000 second would not be a second, it would be a third behind recovery services, whatever their amount was, and it was substantial. So the title company says, gosh, oh gee, what are we going to do? We can't close the deal. Seller still wants to do the deal. Buyer still wants to do the deal. And so I'm thinking first to record is first and right. I learned that in real estate school. And I got to thinking, well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to record this $5,000 second before we record the deed. So the seller signs a $5,000 second mortgage from himself to himself. You can borrow money from yourself. It's probably a pretty easy loan to get. We fill out all the documentation. We record it against the property. So now there are two liens recorded against this property. There is the first mortgage to FHA and a second mortgage to the seller, from himself to himself. We let the buyer come along and assume both mortgages. So we deed the property from the seller to the buyer. Second's already there. Where does the recovery services go? Right here is the third. Now, this is a win-win-win deal all around, guys. And the biggest winner in this deal is recovery services. Because this money's not hidden in a can anymore. Now they've got their teeth that they can latch onto something. And believe me, they did. And this guy had to come out of the shadows and stand up for his obligations. They were the biggest winner. Seller won. Seller won because he paid this off in a reasonable period of time, and the seller was free and clear of the deal. Meanwhile, the property's doubled in value in that area. It's worth $80,000 now. Do you think he wasn't going to scratch together enough money to take care of recovery services? Oh, dang right. Once that value went up, he became a real citizen, started making up those back payments, and came out of the bushes. So that was a good thing. And of course, I won because I got the commission. Here's my point. A lot of this stuff seems really kind of out there, but you can make money with this stuff, and you can bless lives with this stuff. This seller was so elated that we were able to do this deal. He gave me another listing immediately and another one after that, and much nicer properties. This was just one oddball thing they owned. If you bless other people's lives, including this numbnuts that didn't deserve it, but if you bless other people's lives, okay, you're going to make some money in this business. But you have to have the knowledge in order to do it, okay? So, Paul, that's a long-winded response to your question, but I hope you found that a little bit entertaining. Okay, here's one from Steve. He says, let me see, if an owner wanted to add a spouse as a joint tenant on title after he already owned it, how would he do that? Okay. So I guess he got married, or maybe he owned this property separately and then wanted to add his wife later. But he, depending on where he lived, I mean, we're not a community property state here in Utah. But some states that are our neighbors are, like Idaho and Arizona and California and whatnot. So there are issues there. But the way you do this, if you own a property in severalty, it's yours only, and then you get married and you decide to put your title on with your spouse, so your spouse will be on title with you, you have to deed the property from you to you and your spouse. So, you know, you sign your deed over here, and then you run over here real quick and you accept it together. Okay, so it's you're giving it not to her half interest, but the whole thing is going to us. So because there are unities involved with joint tenancy. And when we do vesting class and ownership, we'll talk a little bit more about that. But that's how you do that, Steve. I maybe, you know, blissful event is coming up in your life and you're thinking about this a little bit. That's nice. Katie, if I had a buyer that was a first-time buyer, are there extra provisions that I would, let me see. If I had a buyer that was a first-time buyer, are there precautions or provisions that need to be put in a contract or special cautions I should be taking with them? Kind of yes and no. I mean, this is their first time, in the game, and you need to make sure they understand what they're doing. But typically, it's the same contracts you use if anybody else. Many states have a buyer disclaimer. You have a buyer sign that's separate from the purchase contract, but it says, "I understand this. I understand that. I understand I was supposed to, check things out. And I understand that you're not anything other than a real estate salesman." But first-time buyers are great to work with. They get so excited, and you're really getting them into the game. You're plugging them into mainstream society. Owning your home is important, and there's a lot of them. I mean, that's where it all starts, and it's fun. Just really pay attention to them. Make sure they understand the process. Take great pains to explain everything to them in advance. And I'll tell you what, I'll teach you a little magic trick, okay? Look, I didn't learn this until I've been in the business about 7 years. So you're going to have a head start because there's some magic words that you use with every buyer, even if they're not first-time buyers. But here are the magic words. You might want to write them down. It's keep your fingers crossed. Keep your fingers crossed. You need to say that a lot. Okay. So when they ask you the question, well, Rick, do you think it's going to appraise? Hey, everything should be fine. There's a lot of comps in the area, all look good, but use the magic words. Keep your fingers crossed. Okay. Okay. You're writing an offer for a buyer, and the buyer says, well, what do you think about my offer? Do you think the seller will accept it? And you say, this is the finest offer I've ever written or even heard about. Of course, it's the first one you've ever done too. But this is the finest offer that was ever conceived by man. If the seller doesn't accept this deal, they're total blithering idiots. Okay, I would understand and be confident that if they don't take this deal as written, they're crazy. Okay, and so you go over there, and the seller says, "Well, everything looks pretty good, except I don't want to give them the refrigerator. It's only like 2 weeks old. I just bought it, and I don't want to throw that in. We want to move that out and take it with us to the next place." So you got them all set up here. And then you come back and you say, well, hey, congratulations, I accepted the deal, except you don't get the fridge, and you just became an obstructionist in your own deal. What if you'd said, gee, Rick, do you think this is a great offer? It's a fine offer, and I'll be proud to represent it, and I'll do my very best for you, but keep your fingers crossed. See, doesn't that just lower their expectation just a little bit? Just keep your fingers crossed. Well, Rick, do you think the buyer will qualify for the loan? They should. They're pre-qualified, and I know the lender, and I've talked to them, and they think it's going to be, but keep your fingers crossed. Keep your fingers crossed makes people more malleable. It makes people more flexible. It makes people more willing to accept that counter proposal or to do the things necessary to make a deal work. Look, every real estate transaction you get involved with is going to have one or two major hiccups. It's just the nature of the business. It's why we make the big money, because we have to go out there and push it back together. We have to, get out there with our hammers and hammer it back together and make it work. Okay. And we have to resell the people 3 or 4 times sometimes. And so keeping people more malleable and in the groove with you is important. And those are the magic words, Katie, keep your fingers crossed. Okay. Jacob says, will all encumbrances show up on a title report? Well, yes and no, Jacob. When you get that preliminary title report back from the title company, it's one of the disclosures that you use, and you should sit down with your buyers and go through it with them so they understand it, which means you probably have to sit down with the title person when you're new and have them explain it to you so you can explain it, which they're willing to do, believe me. And they'll probably buy you lunch too. And then so then you go out there and you explain it to them. But not all encumbrances are going to appear on a title policy. There are some that could slip in later. I mean, for example, that judgment the buyer had against them, that was a judgment against the buyer, which hurt the deal, not against the seller, but it still made the deal impossible to do the way it normally would have worked. Mechanics liens may not be shown up. And so by working with your title insurance, you can explain to them, especially if they get their proper type of coverage, how they're protected. And then many states have state laws that protect people against mechanics liens and a procedure for that as well. But no, there could be encumbrances that pop up later. It's rare, but it can happen. Okay. Alrighty. Sarah, I'm unclear on where I go to find business, especially in the beginning. Can you elaborate? Well, that's not really a test topic, but yeah, I can elaborate on that a little bit. You know, you go to real estate school, and if it's 120 hours or 400 hours, whatever it is, 60 hours, and whatever state is, and we cram all these facts in your head, but we don't have any time to teach you how to make money in the business. And I throw in a story once in a while, maybe, to entertain you and also to keep you motivated and on track. But I know as a new person getting in the business, it can be very daunting. And the brokers you talk to, many of them will say, well, we provide training, and that's important. And hopefully you're talking to a broker that has integrity and that will be hiring you and really does provide training, because quite frankly, sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. And sometimes the training is not as good as it could be. And I say that because when I got into business in 1977, there virtually wasn't any training. I mean, it wasn't very organized back then. I had to learn a lot of things the hard way. But for me, failure was not an option. So I jumped into everything I could jump into, and I would advise you to take all the training you can get. Take the training your broker gives you and go with it and see what happens. But take other training as well. There are things that you can do right now, Sarah, while you're still in real estate school, to prepare for the day when you're going to start in the real estate business. And there are things you can do to get set up so that day one, you hit the bricks running. I want to tell you that is so vital to your success in real estate. It is absolutely important that you hit the bricks running. You don't have time to fiddle around for 2 or 3 or 4 weeks, your first month in the business, not knowing where to go and what to do, and not having a definite plan set into place to hit the bricks running. It is critical. For one thing, you're only going to get probably one chance to make this work. Sarah, if you don't make it in 2015, are you going to come back and try it again in 2018? Yeah. Is your spouse going to let you come back and try it again in 2018? Oh, honey, last time, gosh, we starved to death, and there were all those expenses of the business, and we didn't make any money, and we had to go to the parents, and we had to sell our stocks and dip into our retirement or whatever. Okay, you gotta have a plan. You got to make it work because you are on a commission basis. Real estate can be the very best business you ever got into, and you make more money in this business with less investment than almost anything else I know of. But can also be a flat zero bomb out where you don't make enough money or any money if you don't have a track to run on. But there are some things you can do right now, and let me give you some ideas. Okay, first of all, let me debunk some of the training that's out there. I'm really passionate about new agents getting up and going. I'm passionate about new agents becoming Rookie of the Years in their company or in the board that they're in. I was a Rookie of the Year. It meant a lot to me. But since then, I've been more proud that I've developed 8 other Rookie of the Years. So listen to what I have to say, Sarah. It's real important, okay? Years ago, a very close friend of mine who was a broker up in Oregon territory had about 6 or 8 offices. And this guy was a very analytical guy. He had an MBA. He did a lot of training at Harvard. And he analyzed every piece of business that came through his doors in his company. And he found that there are 6 sources of business that for a new agent, in their first 2 years in the business, there are 6 sources that will give you 87% of all your commission checks. His name was Dick. He's passed on now, but he was a wonderful friend of mine. I've done my own studies, and it correlates with what Dick found out. And I have a friend in Florida who's done studies, and it correlates with what Dick found out. So we know that there's 6 sources of business that you must concentrate on when you're new. Now, what will happen is when you get in the groove and you're working your business and you're out there making it happen, you will find a niche, or a niche will find you. And then you'll kind of focus on that niche, and you'll be mining this, vein of gold for years in that niche, and that's exciting. But you won't find the niche if you're not out doing what you're supposed to be doing. Now, one of these sources is your own sphere of influence. And let me give you some advice here. And I'm not critical of my fellow brokers, okay, except that I am. Because a lot of them, it's been a long time since they were a new agent. And quite frankly, they're very good at what they do, but they become unconsciously competent. They don't know how to tell you what they do to become so successful. They just do it. And there's a lot of schmucky stuff out there about how to do this business, okay? And one of the concepts they're teaching is, well, here's how you do it, kid. You go out and talk to at least 5 people every single day, and you ask them this question. You say, do you know anyone that wants to buy or sell real estate? You don't? Oh, sorry. Do you know anyone who wants to buy or sell real estate? And just keep going. Ask at least 5 people a day. 5 people, and you'll come across somebody that has an interest in buying or selling real estate, or they know someone that does, and you'll follow up on that lead. That's how you do it, kid. Now, I'm here to tell you that if you do that, particularly with your own sphere of influence, okay, you're going to put yourself back maybe 6 months. And it could cost you your career. Don't do that. Okay, let me explain why. Well, just this week, one of the engineers I work with in the commercial niche that I'm working right now stuck his head in my office. Gosh, I think it was like Monday. It was like yesterday. Today's Tuesday. No, yeah, today's Tuesday. It was yesterday. Okay, stuck his head in my office. He said, "Hey, Roller, I've been telling you about my nephew who got in real estate." Yeah, really? Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, you told me. Well, I think he's finally got a deal. It's been like 4 months. He finally put together a deal, and I don't know, Rick. I just don't think he has personality for it. And he turned around and walked out. Now this was blood. This was a guy on that young man's sphere of influence that was his uncle. Do you think he's going to send a referral to that kid with that type of an attitude? Heavens no, because the kid didn't do what he should have been doing. And let me back up a little bit, and let's start from the beginning with that background so you understand, okay? If you run around and you ask people that question, do you know anyone who wants to buy or sell real estate? It starts off, okay, hey, do you know anyone who wants to buy or sell real estate? You don't? No. Hey, do you know anyone who wants to buy or sell real estate? You don't. Hey, do you know anyone that wants to buy or sell real estate? I'm starving, man. Do you know anyone who wants to buy or sell real estate? I'm begging for business, please. Are they going to give you referrals? See, everyone in your sphere of influence knows someone that got in the business and failed. Every one of them. Oh, I remember that guy from the office. He got in real estate. He came back to work, couldn't make it. Every one of them knows somebody that failed. And they don't know which camp you're going to fall into yet. So they're not going to recommend you to their boss. Now, look, there's some people in your sphere of influence that love you no matter what. I mean, come on. There's that Uncle Fred. He's been there your whole life. Truth is, he was there when you were conceived. And he was with your parents or on a trip camping somewhere. He was there when you were born. He was there when you were baptized. He was there when you graduated from high school. He was there when you got married. He was there when you got divorced. Uncle Fred loves you like his own kid, and he will give you a referral no matter what. But there's not that many Uncle Freds to make a living. You need to have a lot of people in your sphere of influence. You need to be giving referrals from all of them. So 2 things you've got to do, guys. You've got to let them know you're in the business. Now, you can't let them know when you're in real estate schools. You can't solicit business when you don't have a license. But the day you're in business, you could turn that switch on and let everybody know you're in real estate. Now, one of the things you could do is first of all, you got to make a sphere of influence list. And I'm telling you right now, most people that get in this business don't even do that for 2 years. And these are people that would have supported them from the beginning. These are people that you go to a party, family party, gathering, And everyone's talking, and you say, hey, Uncle Bob, what's new with you? And they say, well, let me tell you about my new house. Oh, it's so cool. It's up on the mountain. I got all these views. Oh, we paid a lot of money. But boy, we love it, and it's so exciting. And all of a sudden, Uncle Bob has a weird look come over his face. He says, oh, that's right. You're in real estate, aren't you? You know, I should have called you. That's not Uncle, everyone in real estate has a story like that, but that is not Uncle Bob's fault. It's your fault for not building a place in his brain. Step one, you've got to build a place in his brain. When he thinks of real estate, Uncle Bob thinks of you. It's, top of mind mentality. You've got to keep in front of him. And quite frankly, he still thinks of you as your former profession, whatever that was. That's how he thinks of you. And until you get a number of impressions in Uncle Bob's brain, maybe 6, maybe 8, before all of a sudden he associates my niece with real estate, my niece with real estate. So you got to build that top of brain mentality. And I'll tell you how to do that in a moment. And then there's step 2 that most people don't do. They don't know how to do this. I'm telling you, if you want to be a rookie of the year, if you want to hit the bricks running, if you want to make this business work for you, number 2 is very important, and that is you've got to prove performance. Proof of performance is absolutely what was missing from that young man's life when his engineer uncle stuck his head in my office and said, I'm not sure he has personality for it. Proof of performance. So how do you do this? It's really quite simple. You can do it with postcards, and you can do it with video postcards. But you got to have the list. You got to have your list ready to go. So take this time when you're in real estate school and put that list together. It is mind-numbing, painful work. And that's why most real estate agents don't do it till they've been in business for 2 years, okay? But you've got to build that list. And I don't care if it has 20 people on it. It's better if it has 200 people on it. But, and build that list. Then the day you start in real estate, you start telling them you're in real estate. And you don't beg for business. You don't ask them. You don't even want them to buy or sell. You always approach people from a position of strength. So you can rely on your office as well as your own work. If you don't have a listing on day 1, which you probably will not, but if you don't have a listing day 1, lean on someone else's listing. And let all those people know in your sphere of influence, either through physical postcards, video postcards, or social media, which you could get all set up before you get into business. And then the day you're in the business, you turn it on. Annual. Oh, whoops. You turn it on. Okay. And so what happens is everyone says, okay, hey guys, guess what? Here's a property, and you hold up a fact sheet. Here's a property we're marketing. And it's like this, that, and thus and so. Do you guys know anyone that might want to buy this property? Okay. Let me know if you do, because, I'd like to get this one sold. Okay. Now, did you say it was your listing? No, you said we are marketing this property. Okay. Now, do you catch the subtle difference there? Hey, do you know anyone who wants to buy real estate? You're begging. Hey guys, I'm marketing this property. You're doing your job. You're approaching them from a position of strength. Now, after Uncle Bob has seen about 6 or 7 or 8 of those things, he's going to say, whoa, my niece is in real estate. Okay, and that's step 1. But step 2 is when it sells. Step 2 is you notify everyone, hey guys, remember this little property over on the north side I was talking to you about? Man, we got that one sold. Now, truth, okay? You had nothing to do with that sale. In fact, your own office had nothing to do with that sale. They put it on the MLS, the multiple listing service, and another office sold it. But whether you sold it, or whether your office sold it, or whether another office sold it, the listing agent caused it to get sold, and you were helping him. So we got it sold, okay? Now, if this nephew had done that to the engineer, poked his head in my office, what do you think his attitude would have been if he would have seen, hey, uncle, guess what? I'm selling this property. We're marketing this property. And then a week later, hey, uncle, guess what? We got it sold. Now I'm working on this property. Do you know anyone who might want to buy that? What would the attitude of his uncle been then? He would have said, my goodness, my nephew's making it happen out there. My nephew's a realtor. My nephew's out there selling properties. This is cool. So because 2 things, top of mind, proof of performance. Always approach people from a position of strength. You don't go out and beg for business. When you go out tracting door to door, if you wanted to do that, you're knocking on doors. You carry a property brochure of a property nearby and say, hey, we're out in the neighborhood and we're letting people know we have this property for sale. Do you know anyone who might want to buy it? Great. When are you folks thinking about moving? Now, it's not selling. Selling's too complex. Gosh, contracts, closings, numbers, moving's easy, conceptually. Get a box, fill it up, tape it up, move. So it's not when you think about selling, it's when you think about moving, because they understand that. Oh, we're never going to move. We're going to die here. We love it here. Okay, great. Oh, but that lady across the street, gee whiz, she's, they just got divorced. She's thinking about moving. Oh, okay, I'll go right over there. Hi. We're marketing this property in the area. You don't even might want to buy it, or when are you thinking about moving? And guys, it's always work from a position of strength where people perceive you as someone that is successful and doing their job, not begging for business. But yet people start out that other way. Their uncle or their list has the same attitude that engineer had when we popped it. I'm not sure that, my nephew has a personality for it. Everyone has a personality for it. It takes tenacity and a willingness to bless people's lives, and bravery and courage in an extent enough that you can go out and do uncomfortable things like talking to people you don't know. For some of you, it's easy. For many of you, it's not. But you can make this work. You can make it happen. Okay, once again, I just want to tell you that, by the way, we'll share some of the other ideas on the 6 sources of business as we get further on in the program. But one of your main sources of business, and you have to do this, guys, because it's the 2 or 3 deals that you might get from your sphere of influence in the beginning that will give you the traction to find your niche. And these are people that know and love and respect you, hopefully. And even if they don't, they're still going to give you referrals when they know you're in the business and you have proven performance. The other ones we'll talk about later. They're all part of a series I put together called Jumpstart. And Jumpstart is the material that I use to train those other agents on how to become Rookie of the Years. That's a package you can look at, you can buy. It has a very modest price, but that's a topic for another time. This is Rick Roller. Thanks for tuning in to this Google Hangout, where we talk about getting you through the exam the first time. If you want to send in some questions, please do make a comment on the YouTube video channel, or you can send it in on the response area in Google+. And we'll see you next time.